Hello over the peak people. Saturday. I'll just clear through the comments from yesterday's long central banking video. I had a bad day yesterday with my technology. Everything went wrong. So hopefully today things will go better for me. First, or is it now? No, because they're upside down. The last comment in is from Big Collapso. I'm going to read it. Once you are short on wealth and long on numbers, it's just a faster and faster set of tricks to keep it covered up until the day of reckoning comes. Bernie Madoff, I would think, must be sitting in his cell laughing and identifying with each phase of increasing ridiculous machinations of these characters. Now, what I want to point out there is that is a useless comment, and it doesn't have a question mark in it. And I don't really think, in my memory, that Big Collapso has ever made a comment with a question mark in it. That's important. People that think they know everything and don't need to use question marks are a danger to humanity. Right. Moving on. Other comments. CSA Ricardo. I've answered that. That had a question mark in it. Nascent Mind has a question mark in it, and I'll come back to that. And Snedmeister, the only other one, had quite a few question marks in it. If we ever think in any of this stuff that we don't need to use question marks, we are getting severely above ourselves. And that includes me. I've got to put these projections over to a greater extent as though I know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, it just becomes too bitty. If I go, I think, in my opinion, or I think it works that way all the time, it just becomes bitty. So I put things over sometimes as though I know something when really I'm not sure about it at all. But hopefully you know that. It's really very worrying for me, people like Big Collapso and a lot of people out there that I read on other blogs that just know everything about this subject. So much that I have no idea why somebody like Big Collapso would watch my videos. I would think that I might as well be whistling Stephen Sondheim's greatest hits as would be as use as it would be to Big Collapso. You will not be listening and understanding to an absolute word of it. It's a complete waste of his time. And maybe there are more of you out there that are completely and utterly wasting your time listening because basically you know everything anyway. So I encourage you very strongly to sod off. Okay? Right, Nascent Mind. The question basically is sterilization used to manipulate the value of domestic currency? Is sterilization used to manipulate the value of a domestic currency? It's a hell of a question because it all depends on how you come at this. The answer is yes, but it's all indirect and whatever. So, quick one on sterilization, because there will be some people that have listened that haven't quite got the sterilization thing. Maybe not even quite got quantitative easing. It's understandable. It's not natural stuff. Quantitative easing. There are bits of paper that I've talked about, say short-term paper or long-term paper, bonds, whatever they might be, out in the world. And the central bank says, well, I think the out there in the world could do with more what is called cash money as opposed to those bits of paper. So the central bank says, I'll give you a good price on your bits of paper. And the outside world swap. They say, oh, okay then, I'll give you my bits of paper, which are generally IOUs or of some sort, size of description, but longer term, set out contracts, like bonds. So the bonds then go to the central bank, and the cash there is in the outside world. Right. So the idea is then, if there's more cash in the outside world, there's no credit crunch, and there's more money to be flying around, and everybody's jolly. That's the idea. One of the main problems here is that the outside world in a transaction like this is between the central bank and general institutions. But if that institution is either a bank or even a pension fund, the pension fund will have its money in a bank, and banks have their money in the central bank. So what really is happening when we say the real world, it's not really the real world. What's happening is purely in central bank land. Actually, in the central bank, we could think, right in the central bank, they take a bogey, a truck of bonds to one room, and take a load of cash and put it in another room. They just swap them over the different rooms, but in the central bank. Because banks bank with the central bank. That's where their money is, in the central bank. And institutions and people that have had their bonds bought off them bank with banks who bank with the central bank. So the real world isn't really out there in the real world at all. It's still within the central bank, and this is the problem. And this is why they talk of channels of getting the money out from the central bank, to institutions, and out to the real outside world. Because the money is still in the central bank. It's just swapped departments. Okay, that's quantitative easing. Sterilization, which is, how could I put this? Back in the 70s and things like that, the Chicago boys in the 80s, the Chicago boys, Milton Friedman and things, with the inflation is everywhere and at all times a monetary phenomenon, was that about right, as a quote, say that it's the money supply, stupid. If you've got more money supply, there's more money out there to bid up the price of goods and services, and voila, inflation. Okay, we're kind of on a different subject now, but this was an explanation of why we had inflation. But you've got the difference between monetary base and money supply. The monetary base is hidden up there in the central bank, and we know the things in the departments in the central bank. The cash department is stocked full of money. That's the monetary, got to get it right, that's the monetary base. But the money supply is when it's actually owned by me and I'm depositing it in a bank. That's the money supply. Yeah, something like that. That's more real outside world stuff. So there's plenty of base money, but there's not much money owned by me as a deposit in the bank. Right. So the confusion, and I think it still knocks around the place a bit, is between when people say money supply, they often think that the monetary base, money just stuck in the Fed, is money supply, and link it to Friedman and the Chicago boys, and think, well, all this money is going to flood out there and cause inflation, when it won't. Because the only way it can get out there, it's got to be sucked. It's very hard to push it. It can be pushed, and I'll talk about pushing it a bit. It's really best if it's sucked, as in I go into a bank and say, can I borrow some of that money? And again, this is what I keep talking about, is would they actually lend me some of that stock, of that central bank money stuck up in the central bank department there? Would they kind of send that to me? And I'm just on the cusp of turning now and saying I think they might, because that money is doing them no good. So they could just invent new money and give it to me, but they've got all this money in the central bank, they might as well give me some of that. But that gets, I'm well confused on that still. But I'm turning. A couple of weeks ago I thought, well, why would they ever lend me any of that? They might as well give me some new stuff. Anyway, that's not what this video is about. So let's see if we can get to where we're at. Sterilization. Sterilization would be, and I've brought in the Chicago boys because inflation in the 70s and 80s was such a dreadful mind twister to banks, economists, and most importantly to governments. Governments fell because of inflation, and they never want it to happen again. They're scared witless of inflation. That's kind of coming off a bit now because the 70s and 80s is becoming quite a long, a generation ago. But the people that remember still remember the problems then and don't want any of this inflation stuff. So they fear any of that inflation stuff. And the books were all written around that time that this money, if you've got lots of money there, it's what causes this inflation stuff. So that people are still fearful of great wadges of money being anywhere because it might break out and cause inflation. But what people are finding now is that you've got to really look into this a lot more deeply and find out just why and how this money is going to break out. It's easy to say, there's a great wad of money, it's going to cause inflation. But then you're asked the precise questions of exactly how is it going to break out there. And that's what's causing a lot of people problems at the moment. Because they've got to really explain how it's going to get out there, and they can't. Okay, sterilization would be, I'll tell you what it is first. Okay, so there were people out there that had, we'll just stick with bond bits of paper, and the central bank said, well, we'll give you cash for them, so there's more cash out there in the outside world. But that outside world now is explained. But sterilization would be, but that's putting a lot of cash out there in the outside world. What we'll need to do is to get some of that cash back in from other people. These people we want to have cash, those people we don't want to have cash. So these bonds that we've just bought, say, or other bits of paper that we've got in stock, we'll sell them to some other people out in the outside world. And the outside world cash then goes to the central bank, and some other bits of paper go out to other people. And if something was sterilized, it would mean that the amount of bonds and cash going one way in one type of deal was balanced out by another lump of cash and bonds swapping over in another type of deal. And effectively, you can imagine it all being shuffled around in different departments in the central bank, and there's somebody with a clipboard in the corridor going, okay, there's bonds going that way, that's 10 of them, cash going that way, 22 of them. At the end of the day, they tally it up, and if bonds and cash have swapped over in the central bank the same, it's a sterilized operation. But Nascent Mind's comment was, do they do this to, bring down the currency, to manipulate the value of the domestic currency? And here we come to the reason I made this video is because what we've got now is America showing itself to be the best of the OECD countries. They are blah plus, where others are either blah or blah negative, or even what's under blah negative. I haven't invented that yet. But the United States, for the start of this year, are doing the best. And generally we can project out shorter, medium term and longer term due to their energy reserves and general vastness, ability to grow food, all sorts of things. America's still the place that I will not bet against, that sort of thing. But as people start to realize this, even though if they invest in the American currency, they're not going to get a very high interest rate because the Fed's holding that interest rate down. The chances are that they're not going to lose much money because the dollar should stay strong because of all I just said. In the short, medium and long term, there's no reason that America should fall, because America is still great. Okay? So people would place safe bets in dollar currency. And if a lot of people place safe bets in dollar currencies, like I hate predicting, but I am predicting. I'm saying that over the next 18 months, the emerging markets are going to come. They're going to get their tidal wave of this credit crisis, this credit crunch, and they are going to get into trouble. And when they get into trouble, they will want to do something with their money too. And they will not want to put it in yen. Swiss francs are being manipulated. Euro will stay low because they'll find some way to keep it low. They'll keep Greece defaulting. Well, it'll naturally happen. Portugal will have trouble. The pigs will always be there, enough to keep the euro low. So the natural hydraulic pressure is on pushing the dollar up. So back to the thing. Is sterilization used to manipulate the value of a domestic currency? I think we will see that it will. Now, the last 2 days of tricky stuff have been saying the Fed are going to do some of this sterilization stuff to keep a few people happy that have this hangover memory of inflation in the 70s and 80s being caused by too much money and it getting out somehow. Now, it's useless of the Fed to sit there and say, oh, listen, idiots, I mean, just explain how is this going to happen? It's just not, is it? The Fed can't do that. So it's got to do something to appease them. So it's going to do a bit of this sterilization stuff. But if you remember in the Financial Times article, what's happening in Bernanke's brain, the bottom line there was, but the overall policy will be undeniably loose. Or what I think they phrased it really nicely, that there will be some candy thrown to these people that don't know what they're talking about, but Bernanke will keep the interest rate absolutely low and will do unsterilized quantitative easing and as much other stuff as he can get away with, which is the equivalent, without making these poor little doves' hearts flutter. And if there's a dollar index, and if the US dollar index, let's say, gets to 80, 82, I should really check what it is now, just to check that I'm not, where can I go, USDX? I'll just Google USDX. If the dollar gets too strong, as I keep saying, central banks and governments work like this. The government won't even have to tell the central bank. The central bank will know that it must keep the dollar low. USD, I must have it in charts to watch somewhere. Bum, 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 bum. It'll be in that one. And I'm just trying to look for a number. It's on 80 now. Okay, so I would say that that is the ceiling. And if it got anywhere near 82, there would be a huge quantitative easing. And it's 80 now. Okay, the USDX is the dollar balance against a basket of other currencies, because it's very hard to know what a currency, whether it's going up or down, because it's only against a basket of other currencies that are going up and down. But what else can you do? So there's a basket of other currencies, and the dollar balanced against it gives us an index, and that index says 80 at the moment, and I'd say that that must be the ceiling. And if it goes up through that ceiling to going up towards 82, Bernanke will megaphone out, shut up you stupid doves, no more candy for you. We're going to do quantitative easing 3 with no sterilization, and that's it. Take that, you bastards. And what does that mean? The people won't get their interest rate. You know, if you're going to buy dollars, what are the risks? Well, that you won't get any money for it, or there's inflation that's going to drive down the value of it when you come to use it. So if he goes, I'm going to do quantitative easing without sterilization, the meme is still out there that will cause inflation, and any money that you put into the dollar will lose buying power in the future because inflation will come and eat at it. I don't think it would, because I think the pressure on the dollar is going to be strong enough. So it's going to be Bernanke giving it, oh, I'm going to debauch the dollar, against the natural impulse of people to want to buy dollars. And Bernanke's just got to do a reverse sales technique on them to say, I wouldn't buy dollars if I were you, because I'm going to debauch them. And that keeps the value of the dollar low against the basket of other currencies. So what they think is best, that America can still export its way out of trouble, and its export sector is really doing quite well at the moment, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because that meme, we can export our way out of that, will continue at least into the medium term. So yes, nascent mind, Matt, my dear, countries do use sterilization to forget exactly what you said, to manipulate the value of the domestic currency. And I think you're going to see that more and more as people will think that Bernanke's doing something because the economy is something, or because unemployment is something, but he'll be doing it purely to resist people buying those dollars. He'll be saying, don't buy these dollars. And he'll be doing it by saying, I'm going to do quantitative easing to the ends of the earth, and I'm not going to sterilize them, so don't bother buying dollars, because you're going to lose money, because inflation's going to bite into your buying power. So I didn't mean to go on like this. I thought it'd be about a 5-minute video. I don't half go on. That's probably me for the weekend. Let's enjoy it. Bye.